Short is the story, long is the life.
Liukong's Archive presents China Urban Legends EP6, Beijing, Chaoyangmennei No. 81. The story I'm about to tell takes place in Beijing, Dongcheng District, at 81, Chaoyangmennei Street. You've probably heard of this building. It's the most famous haunted house in Beijing, no contest. The internet is full of stories about it. Some say it was the mansion of a Kuomintang officer whose concubine hanged herself. Some say it's built on an ancient burial ground. Others say it was a British church where a priest was murdered inside. There are many versions. But honestly, most of them are fabricated. Today I'm going to tell you a story from someone who personally worked on the renovation of this building. His surname is Ma. He's an architect specializing in historical building restoration. In 2016, his company won the bid to renovate 81 Chaoyangmennei. Here's what he told me.
Old Ma first went to 81 Chaoyangmennei in March of 2016. The weather was still cold. Beijing's spring wind carried sand that hit his face like tiny needles. He stood in front of the building, looked up. 2 buildings. One 3-story, one 4-story. Gray brick walls, arched windows, red wooden shutters. Classic early 20th century church architecture. The small courtyard in front was overgrown with weeds. Discarded bricks were piled in the corners. This is one of the most expensive streets in Old Beijing. Chaoyangmennei Avenue, right next to the East 2nd Ring Road. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is nearby. The headquarters of Sinopec is next door. Apartments in this area cost over 100,000 yuan per square meter, and this building had been sitting empty for decades.
Old Ma said that the first time he walked into that building, something felt wrong. Not scary. Not terrifying. Something he couldn't put into words. It was as if the air was heavier inside than outside. Every step felt like walking through resistance. He'd been in the architectural restoration business for 20 years. He'd entered hundreds of old buildings, mountain temples in ruins, factories abandoned for decades, war-torn structures, but he'd never felt anything like this. He didn't dwell on it. He put on his hard hat, picked up his blueprints, and began his survey.
The first floor was in normal condition. Typical Republic-era old building. Most of the wooden floorboards were rotten, large patches of plaster had fallen off the walls, and about a third of the window glass was broken. The lime moldings in the corners were so water-damaged you couldn't make out their original shapes. The ceiling had several large water stains, like gray maps of unknown continents. Old Ma said it looked like no one had taken care of the place for decades. But it wasn't frightening. Just an old, dilapidated building. The second floor was different.
The second floor had 5 rooms. The corridor faced south, the rooms faced north. Of those 5 north-facing rooms, the easternmost one was the smallest, about 20 square meters. When Old Ma pushed the door open, the hinges let out a piercing screech. The room was completely empty. The original wooden floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling all the way down to the floor. The moment he stepped in, his first reaction wasn't what he saw, it was what he smelled. Sandalwood incense. Very faint, very uniform. Not strong. Like the kind of scent that lingers in a temple that's been burning incense for years. Do you smell that? Smell what? Incense. Sandalwood. His colleague sniffed a couple of times and shook his head. Old Ma asked another worker. That person also said no.
Old Ma didn't ask again. He stood in that room trying to locate the source of the scent. It wasn't coming from any particular corner. It was evenly diffused through the entire space, as if the air itself carried the smell. He stood there for about 2 minutes, just breathing and analyzing. He later told me that those 2 minutes gave him a strange association. This room felt like a Buddhist shrine that had never stopped burning incense. Even though the doors and windows had been sealed for decades, the walls and floorboards had absorbed that scent, locked it into the wood and lime, slowly releasing it. This room was not a shrine. This building was not a temple. He touched the lime on the wall, dry, crumbling at the slightest touch. No moisture. The scent wasn't coming from the walls. He crouched down and examined the floor. The wooden planks were rotting. Some spots gave way slightly when stepped on. The gaps were filled with dust. No unusual odor. He stood up, closed the door, and left the room. In the hallway, the scent of sandalwood disappeared.
The first 3 days were uneventful. Workers removed the partition walls that had been added later on the first floor, restoring the original layout. The reinforcement plans for the second and third floors were finalized. No one touched the fourth floor. The floorboards had been rotting for decades. Walking on them made the entire floor shake. Old Ma posted a notice at the stairwell, prohibiting anyone from going up to the fourth floor. On the evening of the fourth day, Old Ma was organizing the construction log in his temporary office on the second floor. Everyone else had gone home. It was around 7 in the evening. Outside the window, it was completely dark. The building had no lights at night, only a desk lamp on his work table, casting a small circle of light onto the blueprint in front of him. Then he heard the sound. Coming from above. Thump. 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 Not footsteps. It was the sound of something hard striking the floor. Intermittent, rhythmic. Like someone repeatedly hitting the same spot. The fourth floor.
He sat in his chair, pen in hand, motionless, listening for several seconds. The sound was faint, but in the empty old building, it was piercingly clear. Each thump was accompanied by a faint vibration, transmitted through the wooden structure, down through the second floor ceiling, into the soles of his feet. He said it was the sound of metal hitting wood. Not footsteps, not something being dragged. It was like someone crouching on the floor, gently tapping with some metal object. Old Ma put down his pen and stood up. He walked into the corridor, looked up at the stairs leading to the third floor. Above him was darkness. He couldn't see anything, but the sound continued, coming from the fourth floor. He didn't call out, "Who's there?" He went back to his desk, opened the drawer, took out a flashlight. Then he walked up to the third floor. The floorboards were steadier than he expected. He stepped across them, past several open doorways, until he reached the stairwell leading to the fourth floor.
The stairs were wooden. Narrow. Steep. When he shone his flashlight upward, he could see the thick dust on the steps. And fragments of fallen plaster, the natural decay of old lime ceilings. He shone the flashlight downward, checking his own footing on the steps. And then he saw the footprints. On the wooden stairs. Clear water stains in the shape of footprints. Complete impressions, as if someone had just stepped out of water and walked onto these dry wooden steps. The prints were large, at least size 42 in Chinese sizing. Each step was clearly defined, heel, arch, toes, all distinct. Old Ma crouched down and touched the edge of one footprint with his finger. Wet. Cold. Ordinary tap water, no temperature, no odor. He shone the light upward, following the stairs. The footprints continued on to the fourth floor, disappearing into darkness. He swept the light across the stairs. Then across the fourth floor landing. He confirmed there were no footprints coming back down. One row of footprints. Going from the third floor to the fourth. Only going up. None coming down.
Old Ma knelt on the stairs and carefully examined every step. There were 12 steps from the third floor landing to the fourth. Every single one had a footprint, same position, same spacing. as if whoever walked there had a steady, unhurried pace. No hesitation, no pauses. The 13th step was the 4th floor itself. The flashlight beam revealed the prints continuing inward across the wooden floor, then vanishing into darkness. Old Ma knelt there for about 30 seconds without moving. Then he stood up, took his flashlight, walked back down to the 3rd floor, then to the 2nd. He sat back at his desk, continued writing his construction log. He didn't go back up.
He told me he thought about it afterwards. What would he have seen if he had gone up those stairs? But he didn't regret not going. His exact words were, "Construction safety rule number 1, never enter an area that hasn't been reinforced." I like to think that was the only reason he didn't go up. The next day, Old Ma told the client's representative about the footprints. The client rep was a man in his 40s. Wore glasses. Spoke softly and politely. "Last night I was at the site. I heard knocking sounds from the 4th floor. When I went up to check, there were wet footprints on the stairs. Only going up." The rep listened without surprise. He was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "You're not doing any work on the 4th floor, are you?" "No. The floorboards are too old. We haven't touched it." The rep nodded. "Good. Has anything happened in this building before?"
The rep didn't answer directly. He said, "You know, before this building was listed as a protected cultural heritage site, some homeless people had been living in it. The police went in to clear them out. They found some things. What exactly they found, I'm not at liberty to say. Were they people or—" The rep cut him off. "I can't say." That was the end of their conversation. But Old Ma didn't let it go. He felt that there was no reliable information about this building at all. Every online legend he'd read fell apart under scrutiny. He decided to investigate himself.
Old Ma went to the Beijing Urban Construction Archives. He requested the historical records for 81 Chaoyangmennei. He photocopied dozens of pages and sat in the archives reading room, going through every single one. Here's the timeline he assembled from those archives.
1910, 81 Chaoyangmennei was completed. The land belonged to the French Catholic mission of the Beijing diocese. The financier was a French missionary named Father Luo. His Chinese name was Luo Zhenglu. According to the archives, he arrived in China in 1885. He first preached in Zhengding, Hebei province, then transferred to Beijing, becoming a priest in the Beijing Catholic diocese. 1912, Father Luo founded a primary school in this building. It was called Luo's Elementary School. No tuition, it enrolled poor children from the neighborhood. The archives contain an original enrollment brochure. The curriculum included Chinese literature, arithmetic, Bible study, and manual labor. The first class had over 40 students. 1937, after the Marco Polo Bridge incident, Beijing was occupied by the Japanese army. Enrollment at Luo's school dwindled until it was forced to close. But Father Luo didn't leave. He continued living upstairs, supported by church relief. 1942, the Pacific War broke out. The Japanese army seized all enemy nations' assets in China. Father Luo, as a French priest, was arrested. He was sent to the Weizian internment camp in Shandong province.
The archives included an oral testimony from a neighbor. The witness, an elderly woman surnamed Zhou, had run a grocery store across the street and lived to be over 90. She said that on the day Father Luo was taken away, 2 Japanese soldiers escorted him out of the building. As he passed her shop, he stopped and said, in broken Chinese, "Don't let anyone dig the foundation of this building. Something is buried there. Digging it out will bring disaster." Old Mrs. Zhou asked him what was buried. Father Luo didn't answer. The soldiers pushed him forward and he was gone. That was the last time he was ever seen on Chaoyangmennei Street.
1945, After Japan surrendered, Father Luo never returned. He had died in the internment camp from malnutrition and disease. This was recorded in the testimony of a fellow prisoner, attached to the last page of the archives. 1949 onward, the building was taken over by the state. First assigned to a Beijing government unit as staff housing. Several families moved in. Within 2 years, they all moved out. The reason for their departure was not recorded. Mid-1950s to early 1960s, the building changed hands several times. A printing factory rented the first floor as a warehouse. A neighborhood workshop produced cardboard boxes there. None of them stayed long. The longest tenancy lasted only 3 years.
Old Ma noticed a pattern. Every departure was explained with vague language. Due to business adjustments. Due to unsuitable premises. Due to lease expiration. Not a single document explicitly explained why anyone left. 1965, the building's purpose changed. The archives record it as a temporary shelter. Who was sheltered there, for how long, and under what authority, none of this was specified. Just one page, a few lines.
Old Ma found a handwritten annotation in the margin of that page. Written in pencil. The handwriting was light, some strokes already faded. 这楼不干净. This building is not clean. No signature. No date. Old Ma searched through the entire file. No one had signed off on this note, no one had processed it. The page had been slipped into the file, never formally handled. Old Ma photocopied that page. He said he wanted to find out who wrote it. From the handwriting, he guessed it was a middle-aged man with a decent education. But he never pursued it. He gave me a reason he didn't say out loud. He was afraid that if he traced it back, he would find that the person who wrote those words had some connection to him.
Old Ma had a friend who studied feng shui. A well-known practitioner in his circles. When the project was halfway through, Old Ma invited him to look at the building. The man walked around the building outside. Then went through the first and second floors. Finally, he stood in the courtyard, staring at the building for a long time. What do you think? The orientation of this building is wrong from the start.
Old Ma understood what he meant. Traditional Chinese architecture follows the principle of sitting north and facing south, especially for residences and public buildings. But 81 Chaoyangmennei doesn't face south. This main entrance faces east. Facing east isn't necessarily bad in feng shui, but the prerequisite is that the east side must have open space to receive the purple energy of dawn. But the east side of 81 Chaoyangmennei is pressed right up against another building, less than 3 meters away. The qi can't enter, the feng shui master said. The east side is blocked. That cuts off the building's energy intake. Then he pointed at the shape of the roof. The building doesn't have a traditional sloped roof. It's flat, with a parapet wall all around. From the front, the entire roof line looks like a horizontal rectangle. Straight edges. No curves. What do you call this? The feng shui master said. It's called a coffin shape. Stand far away and look. The silhouette of this building is a coffin lying on the ground. Old Ma stepped back across the street and looked. He had to admit the man was right.
The feng shui master pointed out another problem. On the north side of 81 Chaoyangmennei, the same side where that small north-facing room was, there were much taller modern buildings. They loomed more than twice the height of the old building, completely blocking the northern sky. The north is the yin direction. When the north never sees sunlight, yin energy cannot dissipate. This building goes at least half the year without a single ray of sunlight hitting its north wall. Moisture and negative energy accumulate on that side, unable to disperse. Old Ma asked him if these problems could be fixed through architectural modifications. The feng shui master thought for a moment. Then said one word, demolish it. In the second month of the renovation, Old Ma's team began working on the basement. The basement of 81 Chaoyangmennei was small. 4 rooms partitioned by gray brick, each about 5 or 6 square meters. They looked like storage spaces. The floor was rammed earth. No one had been down there for many years. On the first day the workers entered the basement, something happened.
An electrician. Old Ma said his surname was Lin, in his 40s, decades of experience, a steady worker, went into the innermost basement room. He was down there for less than an hour. When he came back up, his face was white. He put his toolbox on the ground and said to Old Ma, "I can't do this job." Old Ma asked him what was wrong. Master Lin didn't speak. He just pointed toward the basement, shook his head, packed up his tools, and left. Old Ma didn't stop him. He knew that some people have strong physical reactions to certain places. It wasn't about courage. That afternoon, Old Ma went down to the basement himself.
The basement corridor was narrow. The white lime on the walls had yellowed and was peeling. The ceiling was low. Old Ma is about 5 feet 9 inches, and he could touch it with his raised hand. The door to the innermost room was locked with a rusty iron padlock. Old Ma had a worker cut it off. The lock was so rusted that one snip of the bolt cutters broke it. When the door swung open, a wave of damp air rushed out. The room was empty. For gray brick walls. Rammed earth floor. No ceiling, you could see the wooden beams of the first floor directly above. Old Ma stood at the doorway, looking around. Nothing unusual. But on the inside top of the doorframe, he found a small piece of paper. Yellowed, faded. Thin xian paper. Handwritten in brush, neat characters, clearly the work of someone educated in the old style. Evil spirit inside. Do not enter. Old Ma tore the paper down. Not because he believed in superstition, because if the workers saw it, it would affect morale. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Later, he kept it in his office, locked in a drawer. I asked him if I could take a photo. He said no. He said he didn't want these things spreading. Old Ma later contacted a friend who was a history researcher to find out more about Father Luo. The archives didn't have his full original name. Only that his surname was Luo. His French name probably began with Pierre. He arrived in China around 1880, preached in Hebei, and was assigned to Beijing in 1910. Why did he choose Chaoyangmennei Street to build this building? Old Ma's historian friend offered a theory. In the Qing dynasty, that area was on the route used to transport condemned prisoners to execution.
Kaishaku was the main execution ground. Prisoners were led from the Ministry of Punishment's jail, through Xuanwu Gate, down Luomashi Street, to Kaishaku. But that was the early Qing execution ground. In the late Qing period, the execution ground was moved to near Dongxi Pailu, very close to Chaoyangmennei Street. In other words, the area around 81 Chaoyangmennei was very close to the late Qing execution ground. Old Ma said he never verified whether this was true, but if it was a building constructed next to an execution ground, later turned into a French missionary school, the history of this building was far more complex than he had imagined.
During the 3-month renovation, 4 people quit Old Ma's team. The first one left on the 3rd day. He was walking past the north-facing room on the 2nd floor when he heard chanting from inside. He thought someone was secretly performing some superstitious ritual in there. He pressed his ear to the door. Then he noticed the door was locked from the outside. The lock's dust was undisturbed. No one had touched it. He told the foreman the same day that he couldn't work there. The second was the electrician, Master Lin. The one who went into the basement. He told Old Ma later that the temperature in that innermost room was much lower than anywhere else, so cold it was like walking into a freezer. He'd been in hundreds of basements over his decades of work. None had been as cold as that one. The third left during the 3rd month, a painter. He said that whenever he was painting on the third floor, he felt someone standing behind him. He turned around dozens of times. Nothing was ever there. But the feeling of being watched never went away. He lasted 2 weeks. The fourth person was Old Ma's assistant, a young man in his 20s, fresh out of university. He was the last to leave. On his last day, he didn't say a word. The next day, he just didn't show up. Old Ma called him and asked what was wrong. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "That room has a light on every night." "Which room?" "The easternmost room on the second floor. The north-facing room." Old Ma said, "Impossible. That room was locked. No electricity. The windows were sealed." "I know. But every night when I leave and look back at the building from the street corner, the easternmost window on the second floor, there's light." Old Ma decided to examine the brick wall that had been sealed in 1965. He took his flashlight and carefully inspected the first floor from east to west, north to south. And sure enough, near the north-facing windows, he found bricks that were a different color. Those bricks were lighter than the original gray bricks. The cement between them was wider, clearly a repair job done later. Old Ma tapped a few with his fingers. Solid bricks, but the sound was different from the surrounding old brick. He called a worker to chisel one of the bricks loose. When the brick fell away, it revealed a cavity behind it. The flashlight beam showed a space about a meter deep. The ground inside was covered in dust, but the distribution of the dust was uneven. The center had very little dust. The edges were thick, as if something had once been placed in the middle, then removed. Old Ma didn't chisel any more bricks loose. He put the brick back in place and sealed it with cement. He made a note on the construction drawings, "Cavity discovered, refilled." He didn't write in the note that this was the cavity behind the 1965 brick wall. He didn't write what he had seen inside. 3 months later, the project was completed on schedule. The exterior of 81 Chaoyangmennei was restored to new condition. The gray brick walls were repointed, the red wooden shutters had new hardware, the stone steps of the porch were replaced. The courtyard was cleared of weeds and paved with new bricks. The north-facing room on the second floor, Old Ma never let anyone touch it. No new flooring, no painting, no window replacement. On the construction drawings, he wrote 4 words, "Maintain current condition." When the client came for the final inspection, they asked why that room hadn't been renovated. Old Ma said the structure was sound, no need. The client didn't press. After the final sign-off, Old Ma never went back to 81 Chaoyangmennei. But his assistant, Xiao Wang, went back once, not for work, just passing by and couldn't resist going in for a look. When he came back, he told Old Ma something. That north-facing room's window, from the outside, it was dark. Same as before. But this time he noticed a fresh footprint on the windowsill. Not left over from the construction, he had cleaned that spot himself after the project ended. The footprint was clean, no dust, as if it had been stepped on just moments ago. Xiao Wang took one look and left. He hasn't been back since. I spoke with Old Ma 4 times in total. The first time was at a tea house, he gave a rough overview. The second time was at his office, he brought out the photocopied archives and his construction logs. The third time was on the phone, he added some details. The fourth and last time was at a hot pot restaurant. He'd had some alcohol. After a few drinks, he mentioned something he hadn't told me before.
He said that after the project ended, he had a dream. In the dream, he was standing in the corridor on the second floor of 81 Chaoyangmennei. The corridor was longer than its actual length. At the far end stood a figure wearing an old-style long gown, facing away from him. He asked who it was. The figure didn't turn around. In a low voice, it spoke a sentence in French. He didn't understand French. But when he woke up, he remembered the pronunciation and wrote it down. He spent a whole day looking it up in a dictionary. The translation was 8 characters in Chinese. The thing beneath your feet. It's more than one layer. He searched for a long time but never found any information about this sentence. He wasn't sure if it was a dream or something else. You mean? He stopped me before I could finish. Some things, he said, stop at the tip of your tongue. You know they're there, but you can't say them. I didn't ask him any more questions after that.
After the project was done, Old Ma told me something I've always remembered. He said this building had 3 problems, not feng shui or supernatural things, but real architectural problems.
Drainage. The building's drainage system was flawed from the start. There was no drain pipe on the north wall. Rainwater ran down the wall year after year, seeping into the foundation. Over a century, the brick on the north wall had become saturated. Moss grew at the base of the wall. It was perpetually cold and damp. Sunlight. 3 sides of the building were blocked by taller structures. Only about 2 hours around noon had direct sunlight. The rest of the time was entirely indirect light. The north-facing rooms never saw direct sunlight. No sunlight means no drying. No drying means mold. When mold breaks down wood, it produces a certain smell. Some people think it smells like sandalwood incense. Groundwater. In the late Qing dynasty, this area was wasteland with a very shallow water table. When the basement was dug, groundwater seeped in, keeping the soil beneath the foundation permanently saturated. Moisture traveled upward through capillary action, making the entire building's base damp.
After listing these 3 problems, he paused. All these architectural problems are valid. But I still have one question. There are hundreds of old Republic-era buildings in Beijing with similar issues. Why did only this one have so many incidents? What's your answer? I don't have an answer. He probably had an answer. But he didn't say it. Later, Old Ma encountered an elderly man on another project. It was an accidental meeting, a restoration project for an old church near Chaoyangmennei. The church's priest was a Canadian in his late 70s or 80s, who had lived most of his life in China. During their conversation, Old Ma happened to mention 81 Chaoyangmennei. I know that building. The French building. I knew a colleague of Father Luo's many years ago.
He said he knew an old missionary who had been a contemporary of Father Luo. Before he died, that missionary once mentioned 81 Chaoyangmennei. He said that during all the decades Father Luo lived there, he had been doing one thing. He had buried something in the basement. That thing had been with him since he first arrived in China. He brought it from France. What exactly it was, no one knew. Father Luo never showed it to anyone. He only said one thing: this object cannot stay in a church, cannot stay above ground. It can only be hidden in the earth.
In our church, there's a saying, some sacred objects cannot see the light. If they see the light, something terrible will happen. I don't know what Father Luo buried. But the old missionary told me something. He said the longer that thing stays buried underground, the more unsettled the building above becomes. Is that thing still down there? I don't know. If the people who sealed the walls in 1965 found it and moved it, then it's somewhere else now. If they didn't find it. He didn't finish the sentence. Old Ma told me this story late at night. It was very cold that day in Beijing. The tea house's heating wasn't enough. He pulled up his coat collar and hunched in his chair. What do you think Father Luo buried? I don't want to guess. When you renovated the building, did you ever think about digging up the rammed earth floor in the basement to see? He was silent for a long time. Then he asked me a question in return. If what Father Luo said was true, that thing was buried there to hold something down. If you dig it up, what do you think would come out? Have you ever thought about that? I had nothing to say. I didn't contact him for a long time after that. Not because I didn't want to. Because his last question stayed in my head, spinning around, and every time it did, something tightened in my chest. Closing, Arya. Think about it. A century-old building. Something buried in the ground that was brought all the way from France. Bricked up cavities in the walls. Footprints under the floorboards that only go up, never down. A room where only some people can smell sandalwood incense. A pale blur behind the window, watching the pedestrians on the street below. Which of these can you truly explain? I can't explain any of them. And I don't want to. Some things are better left buried than dug up. If you ever visit Beijing, you can go see it for yourself. 81, Chaoyangmennei Street. Take the subway to Chaoyangmennei Station, exit A, walk a few hundred meters. It's right there. But if you decide to go,